In today's episode of the Beyond Pain podcast, Joe and I sit down and discuss some fundamentals of pain, starting with its definition. From there, we move on and talk about all sorts of subdivisions and things to consider when it comes to pain, mainly validating the person's story and better understanding ways to interpret and communicate pain. We hope you enjoy this episode and all future episodes of the Beyond Pain podcast. And without further ado, here's today's episode.
Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
We're going for all-you-can-eat Korean barbecue tomorrow for my sister's birthday.
Oh, all right.
That'd be good.
That's fantastic.
It's not New. Actually, I'm recording, so we can put this on the podcast. But it's not New York Korean barbecue. I guess like a whole new level, Flushing Korean barbecue. When I was last in New York, I went and I was like, "Fuck, this is good." So good.
The Korean barbecue in Queens is no joke. That is for sure. I love Courtney actually still always brings it up. She's always like, "Can we go back to Queens for like Korean barbecue?" And
go.
I mean, I'm always down for Korean barbecue. It's just a matter of like the traveling, right? You know what it's like. Well, you lived in Queens, so you don't know what it's like. But like to get from like Long Island anywhere in like Queens it's going to take me like over an hour. That's why I don't go to Yankee games anymore.
Over an hour?
You know.
What?
Yeah, by the time by the time I would drive there, it's going to take me at least 35 minutes. And then it's parking.
Now we're talking.
Right.
Yeah, the Flushing can be challenging. So I get you on that. You know, having to find parking. But like here, everything is like a 20-minute drive now for me, 25-minute drive.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful.
I feel like everything is like, doesn't matter where you go in North Carolina, like around here, 20 minutes. It's like the magic number. I don't know how. I'm like, okay, we drove here, which is closer to this place than our house, 20 minutes to get there. 18 minutes to get there. Like, how is this possible? Everything's 18 to 20 minutes away.
I know. Well, I mean, that's just like that. Isn't that just normal? I mean, shouldn't that just be normal? Like what we all expect?
Not when you live in Astoria, when it takes 20 minutes to drive 3 blocks, but I can walk anywhere that I want in any period of time.
Well, yeah, of course. But I mean, like from just like a normal human being existence, it should be that way where you are now. Not like I'm going to the city with.
Sure.
I'm supposed to go to the city with Avery later. We'll see if that still happens now. But we have tickets to a show, like a dance show that my client gave me for Christmas, and I was debating on when to leave because the show's at 7:30. It's going to get out late. So I don't want to drag Avery around on subways and Long Island Railroad and everything at that time, right? And I Googled, well, what would happen if I leave my house and drove into the city to like 55th and 7th at 5 o'clock, right? And Google Maps basically said to me, it could take you
don't do that.
50 minutes or 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
that was the average. Well, it's like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place because if I pick her up at 3 when she gets out of school, I'm going to hit school traffic, right? Because it's Friday, I'm thinking that maybe the Friday rush at 5 coming out of the city by the time I get there would be a little bit more tolerable. But then I'm dealing with everybody leaving work in Long Island at 5 o'clock. So there's really no.
I think you're going to be most worried about the Long Island traffic getting near Manhattan. I think once you're around there, I don't think it's going to be too bad, honestly. I don't think you'll be bumper to bumper on at 5, but depends as long as you're avoiding bridges. You know, don't go anywhere that brings you towards Jersey.
Yeah, well, that would be the direction of Staten Island, and yeah, I don't want to go in that direction either.
Yeah, avoid Staten Island at all costs. That's what we know as New Yorkers, right? That's why you got out.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
All
exactly.
right.
So it's like a magnet, though. It always just trying to pull me back in.
We'll sneak this in for some banter on the podcast as things are easy to move around now. But today's episode, Joe, we're going to be talking about pain, which is fun. And I don't know if you looked at our podcast notes yet. I hope you didn't.
Right. Oh, well,
For this episode.
I was putting in notes for myself too. I thought
so you looked this morning. I was hoping you'd be surprised with some of the stuff I actually put in here. That's why I mentioned it. But anyway,
no, I thought it was very good. I thought it was very good, and I wanted to contribute. We're a team. We're the Joes, not
yes.
You do all the work, and then that's why I wanted to hold up my share of the bargain here. I was putting in my thoughts. I thought that's what you wanted me to do, but it's okay. We're learning.
Yes. No. Well, mainly why is because as I was doing some research on pain and the definitions, I was actually a little surprised by the definition. So I wanted to almost see what you thought fresh, but you've probably already read it, so we'll leave it at that. But anyway, as I was saying, today's episode we're going to be talking about pain. We're going to be going over what you can find on the internet as far as the definition of pain goes, and then we're each going to define pain ourselves from our lens, the way that we work with people, and we'll find out if there are differences between the actual definition and ours, and we're going to find out if we differ in any way, shape, or form as far as how we view pain, which with how complex it is, I'm sure there's going to be something that we'll be able to add on that won't be exactly the same as each other, and we may even have a disagreement. Who knows?
No, a professional discourse.
Yes,
I don't
course,
never
obviously.
disagree.
Well, Joe, I mean, I think we can disagree, but that's we can do it in a very positive manner where we both learn something, and hopefully listeners as well.
Yeah, I actually think that when we disagree, we just go hard at each other, because I think that's what is really missing. Everyone's trying to be too politically correct, so I want you to just come at me, bro.
What
right?
are you
and then we'll just
talking about? We'll have a virtual fight here. You go watch it on YouTube later. All right, so let's start here, Joe. I'm gonna read to you here the Google definition here, and then I'm gonna read to you these other international. I found this International Association for the Study of Pain, which I don't even think I've ever looked at before in my life, and here we are. I don't know where I must be getting my information from. But you tell me, especially, well, let's go here. So Google definition, if you just search pain, right? Physical suffering, discomfort caused by illness or injury. Pretty straightforward definition of what pain is. But what I kind of found interesting, this definition is from 1979. And the reason why I was saying it surprised me is I didn't think that it would be, it's actually a pretty good sentence for pain, for something that was created in 1979, especially with how most medical providers view and talk about pain. Like, if we had this in 1979, why is our viewpoints on pain so like it's this, right? And it's not as complex as it really is. So this definition here is unpleasant sensory emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. Why don't we start there, Joe? Give me your thoughts on this sentence. And how do you feel? Do you feel like it's, I mean, one sentence, right? It's hard. But do you think that in 1979 did a good job of describing pain?
Well, I think you have to think back to what was happening around that time. You had George Engel. Well, you had George Engel and a lot of other people coming out with this idea of the BPS model. This is when the BPS model was really born. You had Patrick Wall with his research. I mean, this was really like the dawn of reframing sort of our understanding of pain, or really kind of diving into its complexity, getting away from this idea that all hurt was harm, which, kind of probably carried a lot of our professions for a really, really long time. So I think at the beginning of our understanding of trying to reframe such a complex experience, this is a big leap, right? To start to talk about emotional experience, and then even the word or words, I should say, of actual or potential tissue damage, right? I mean, and I think that's really kind of very interesting, because if you still ask people, to your point, what is pain, they're going to tell you that it's, something is broken, something is being torn, ripped, degraded, all these different things. And we just know that that's not necessarily the case anymore. And we'll probably dive a little bit more into that as we keep talking. But I do think it makes sense based on what was happening. And I do think it was a good initial attempt to try to organize some new thoughts.
So how do you feel? And I like that. And again, right, going back to philosopher Joe, you went deep on that and how that happened there. But they changed this in 2018, actually. And it's not a whole, the sentence isn't really much different, right? It's an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So a little syntax changes here. And what would you say? How do you feel like this change in 2018? How they deal with that?
Well, I think the change too, and I'm not sure if it was 2018 or 2020, because I was
18.
trying to pull
I
up.
typoed in there.
Okay. Yeah. I had a couple of research articles that were referencing 2020, but I think the biggest nuance here was probably not the reforming of that sentence, but in my opinion, sort of the subtitles that come underneath it, which is sort of what I kind of put in here for us to chew on. So I think the expansion of ideas allowed the IASP to come up with a few other sort of like things to keep in mind. And I do like a lot of these things. And I think it kind of probably shaped my definition of pain, and which we'll get to. But it is always personal was a kind of subtitle of or subdivision of a thought around this definition. Pain and nociception are different. Through experiences, individuals learn about pain. Report of pain should always be respected. Pain usually serves an adaptive strategy, but has maybe potential adverse effects on well-being. And then verbal description is only one way of expressing pain. So I do like these little nuances. And I think you opened up the episode before saying that you were surprised by maybe the definition of pain, or maybe even stumbling across the IASP definition. So I'll kick this back to you then. With these extra subtitles or thoughts, do you feel like there is a better all-encompassing view now, or maybe in 2020 or 2018? And which ones do you like really kind of connect with, being that you've been in practice now for so long?
I think the biggest one in here is report of pain should be respected. I think that's huge. And I was actually having, and the first thing that came to mind, I think I don't know, maybe yesterday or the day before, I was talking to somebody on Instagram, and she had a very difficult history. Some of it was around like endometriosis, and she has like a lot of complex pain issues, and every doctor that she ever saw completely dismissed her and her pain. And I think that's incredibly challenging. I don't think any doctor, and I'm sure there are plenty of cases, maybe not plenty, maybe that's the wrong word to use there, but there are cases, right, where people do make up stuff, right? Like, if there is some personal gain to be had, right? I mean, you can see that. I mean, one of the most common places you'll see that is workers' compensation. People might fudge the truth a little bit and lie about that. So you need to, hunt to see if there's a real truth there. But more often than not, you need to take the person's word for what it is, and then let the clinical picture start to prove or deny or make you question that stuff. Because for someone to have that kind of experience, I can't even imagine on like how incredibly challenging that can be for somebody to hear. This is all in your head. You need to ignore it. You need to push through it. And that's the solution for that person, versus like, where there potentially is some research that could actually help this person as far as, manage pain and be able to function better with pain. Not necessarily tell her to ignore, or that it's all going to go away if you do X, Y, or Z. So I think the report of pain should be respected is probably one of the most important things that I'm seeing here. As well as like obviously I think pain is a personal experience and everyone's going to impact pain differently. And I think I left some note in here somewhere to make sure I brought this up and like the 0 to 10 scale that we all use. I think people, when you ask them, there's a subcategory of people that will tell me, oh, well, I have a high pain tolerance. So they feel like their scale is different. But the reason why the scale is useful, right, is because it's your scale. If you rated pain today at a 5 out of 10, it doesn't matter how somebody else would rate it. It's your 5 out of 10. And when we're looking at how things are progressing or how you're able to, you're overcoming pain, that change, if it goes up to a 7 or it goes down to a 3, it's your 7 or your 3, right? It's your personal experience. It doesn't matter, from my experience, what I've heard a 5 out of 10 is for somebody. It's your 5 out of 10. I want to know exactly what that 5 out of 10 means so we can move forward in your journey of getting out of pain. So those are probably the two big ones I'm seeing here as far as, this is a really good entry point. Or again, right, I'm surprised with, well, maybe not in 2020 being surprised about this, but if this stuff was in 1979, I'd be even more surprised because, again, most people in the medical field, it's very like paint, it's black and white, which I don't really feel that's the case.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the 0 to 10 stuff. And really, I'm even more happy that you identified that report should be respected. I think with the 0 to 10 scale, which is also very interesting on the development of that scale, we won't get into that now. Maybe we can talk about it later. But the development of that scale necessarily wasn't for people in like chronic persistent pain, right? It was more for like drug companies to prescribe opioids, and if you fit a certain number, then you would be able to be prescribed them, or at least from doctors and nurses, right? So I think what's interesting for us as therapists with the 0 to 10 pain scale is that we're really not asking people even what their pain scale is from 0 to 10, right? Because obviously it can't be 0, or else you wouldn't be there. But then the other problem is that a lot of PTs don't think it could be a 9 or a 10, right? Because then you'd be bedridden, or you wouldn't be able to be in front of me right now. Or I've even heard some PTs, or probably even myself when I was younger, oh, it's a 9 or 10. Should I call an ambulance? Like, are you going to be okay? Like, you're in a 9 or 10 out of 10 pain. And then the other thing is, if you're in an insurance-based model, it probably can't be below a 4. But also in the insurance-based model, if it's a 9 or 10, that might cause some stickiness. So really, when a PT, maybe depending on your field, is asking you if your pain's a 0 to 10, they really are wondering if it's between probably like a 4 and 7 or 4 and 8, right? And I think like that's probably the numbers that are going to work for them, because I've literally been a part of clinics, and maybe you can chime in on this, and this will be an interesting thing to maybe grab from some people listening, is when people reported a 3 or a 2, I myself or other colleagues have been like, well, it can't be a 3 or 2 because insurance won't pay for that, right? It can't be a 9 or 10 because insurance won't pay for that. So you're actually coaching people on what to feel. My stance on it now is that when people are describing a 9 or 10, to your point, is that they're just telling you, can you listen to me, right? I am suffering, right? It may be not that I can't get out of bed, but no one, and this is what you brought up, has acknowledged my story, has taken the time to listen to it. So when I hear people tell me that they're in a 9 or 10, I really make sure that I put down my pen, right? And I turn towards them, and I really want to look them in the eye. And I literally just say, well, what's that experience like for you? Because that must be tough, right? And it just opens up this whole world for them to talk to you about the things that they feel. It validates their emotion. And then to your point, you're being respectful. You're actually saying, hey, this is a flag. You just sent out, a flare for me to say, Joe, pause what you're doing for a second and pay attention to me. So I think that was a great point, Joe.
No, and I actually really like that. I don't know if I necessarily thought of it that way. I never, if someone told me 9, 10, or like sometimes people will tell you it's like an 11 out of 10, right? I never disregard that because again, right, I think always subconsciously to me, like I knew if it was there, right? Like sometimes I'll reframe the question for them, like I give them what a 10 what the 10 is. Like 10 is pain that's going to send you to the emergency room. Where does it fall on that scale? Because sometimes it will change that when they like, because people don't know. Like if you just say 0 to 10, it means whatever. Like to me, it might mean something different than to the person who's listening. If it doesn't change the number to them, then I just take it as their word, right? And again, I think people who have that higher level of pain, I want to really dive in and see how it's like impacting their life. And not that I would be paying attention to them more, but I'm definitely going to be listening because I think it would be a red flag to me now that you're saying like, oh, that really jives with what I think I do. But I think now I'm going to be a little bit more cognizant of it because I really do like that approach. Is like, thinking of the 9s, the 10s, the 11s, those really high numbers as more of a like, especially if they're not like a true 9 or 10, right? Like when I'm looking at that scale, right, is like you're in a whole lot of pain where it's going to highly impact your day, and you're going to have a hard time just getting around. But that person's getting around and they don't seem like they're in that much pain. They're giving me those numbers. I like that. Like, hey, let me take a moment to like really sit here and listen to your story and see where we can go from here.
Yeah. And I love that you are able to sort of reframe that. And I kind of reframe that message all the time. But think about the people listening, or even just when you stumbled across that definition, right? And not being aware of it, and it's not pushed, right? That's the other thing. Like it is not well talked about still, just the definition of pain, which I think is an opportunity for us. So when we look at that definition of sensory and emotional experience, right? And then thinking about 9 or 10, that's going to be something that sends you to the emergency room. Well, that could just be emotional suffering, right? What is the emergency room going to do for me with a 9 out of 10 pain, other than probably think that I'm hysterical, probably just give me muscle relaxers, probably, hopefully not, just overprescribe an opioid or something along those lines. So I think it is really valuable to sort of think about the other nuances of what somebody could be telling you when they're rating their pain on a 0 to 10 scale. And then we'll talk maybe before we close out today's episode about, I think like we kind of know what people want, right? Or at least we have a better idea of what people want from us. And I think it's about probably reimagining our roles in this process and matching what people want rather than trying to force things we think they need on them, right? And that was like a kind of like big thing for me over the last few years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are, certain social media accounts that I run through, and it's not that the content's bad, but I think our industry pushes like their agenda on people, right? Like it's, like in the FRC world, right? Like you need to do mobility work in this like very specific high intensity way that's working this specific thing. And if you're not doing it, it's bullshit, right? Like it's a little too ego driven for me. Like, and I follow those principles, right? And I think they're very useful. But and I think Mike Ranfone has always put this. I haven't heard anyone put it in a better way. You need to give people what they need in the context of what they want, and you need to give people what they enjoy out of movement and fitness and whatever they need to get out of pain and do the things that they want to do. But you also need to give them the exact things that they need, and you can't just give them everything that they want because that's also not going to be beneficial for them. So it's finding that balance, and I think that's a really good point there that you make. And our field, the fitness field, the rehab field, they all do it, and it's all got to be our way. And it almost, I think, makes a lot of people who would potentially even enter the space and do the things that we want them to do to back off because it's such a harsh message that people are giving out. And I think fitness and movement, right? It should be inclusive. And if you want to help somebody, they can still do. Like I have people who love to do yoga and they don't want to change that, and they love running and they don't want to change that. But how can I give them what they need so they can be more successful in their practice and have less pain and do things like that? So, again, I think it's a solid point. I don't think we should wait to the end of the episode to necessarily talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. And I think, and it's not just like something like an FRC, but just throw any 3-letter acronym out there. Right. And I think I heard this recently and it escapes me who said it, but I remember writing it down. I was on a run or something. And in our space, right, the physical therapy culture, let's just call it, you can't have culture without cults. Right. I mean, and that's the whole breakdown of that word. So in this sort of evolution of our trying to understand and help people, we've developed separate cults that are pushing, like you said, agendas rather than trying to be collaborative. And I think that creates a lot of confusion for consumers on who to listen to, because the messages around pain to this day, like you said, we threw a definition out there. What is it? It's going to approach a 50-year anniversary on thinking of pain as an emotional potential experience with actual or potential tissue damage. And I am still trying to push that message across. And what I think is so interesting to me too is that people criticize a lot of the BPS model and every model around pain too. It's like, well, hold on, we haven't even gotten the definition of pain that we revised 50 years ago out, and we're already like trying to like throw away like 14 additional systems. It's like, hold on, can we just pause for a second? Like, yeah, I know that there's critiques of the BPS model, but then when I look at newer models of like inactivity, God, can you throw some other models at me, Joe? I'm kind of like blanking right now, but all of these models, to me anyway, they're sort of saying the same things, right? And we're just still not really good at just the basic message, right? So I think that's where I really would wish, as a profession or professions across the board, is that we just organize around that one principle first. Because if I have a different working definition of pain, and chiropractors have a different working definition of pain, and massage therapists have and then doctor, how in the hell are we supposed to collaborate when we all look at pain differently? Now, there could be a strength to that, right? I mean, I think the biggest thing about the biopsychosocial approach that I see clinicians try to do is that they try to be a PT while trying to be a biologist, while trying to be a psychologist, while also trying to be a sociologist. If you were going to be all three things, you'd probably be in school for 50 years, okay? Like, it's just not possible. So pick your lens that you really sort of focus on, and then shine people's problems through that lens, because that's what you're good at, right? So I'll be very honest and upfront. Like, I shine a lot of stories through this sort of like psychological lens, because that's just where I've started, gravitating towards. So when people come in and they're like, oh, well, can you do manual therapy? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I'm like, well, yeah, I could, but I don't think that's why you would want to pay me, right? And I'll refer out to some other people, massage therapists, things like that, and say, hey, if that's what you're looking for, right, that's probably not the light or the problem I'm going to force onto you. I like manual therapy from a diagnostic standpoint. I don't know if I love it anymore from like a treatment standpoint. I think that's another big shift. And then, maybe we could talk about that too at another podcast, but I don't want to deviate too far away from our conversations around pain.
And so let's go here. So, I mean, we talked a lot about it. I think we're on the same, similar wavelength here. If you were going, maybe just give you can give like a quick definition for pain, but really what I want to know, as you're thinking about pain, what have we missed so far in our conversation?
Well, I think I can probably answer both, right? Because I think in my definition of pain, which I've had for a little bit, comes up with two really big key words: is conscious and learned. So my definition that I've toyed around with, because whenever I teach, I like to give this exercise to clinicians. It's like, well, write down your definition of pain, right? And I've sort of opened up a lot of my courses with that question. And it's really been interesting, because then it forced me to reflect on my definition and tweak it. And then what I sort of come down to here is that, pain to me is a conscious experience that creates awareness to a body or mindful state, which is learned as harm or pleasure through experience and context, right? So to me, those ideas of a conscious experience, that's for me where it like kind of really starts. And I think that's where I've tried to make sense of this idea that anything can work, right? And that's not to say that everything works, but I think that anything can work for an individual when you create a conscious shift in awareness, and whether that's manual therapy or exercise or talking, you're focusing someone's mind or attention onto something else for the time being. You're not eliminating the loop, or you're not eliminating pain, or you're not eliminating the emotion or the thing they're suffering with, but at least temporarily, you're shifting thresholds, right? So I'm going to start focusing over here, not as much over there. And I think if we come back to what you were saying before about respecting people and listening and, you know, validating people's experiences, I think that when we see people gravitate towards things we don't believe in, and I mean that as like PTs, you know, like, and you can label, you know, throw out anything that you're thinking about or people listening are thinking about, but you were like, how can that work? You know, that's such BS. You know, I can't believe somebody went for magnet therapy and went to go see a psychic. And, you know, to me, it's just like, hey, look, that person got lost because no one took the time to listen to them. And then someone did, and then offered them a way to shift their focus. And then that's what that person started believing in, right? Their attitudes and their beliefs started to change, all because someone was better at listening than you were, better at validating someone's experience. And then because they were better at it, they were able to offer them a treatment, an intervention to shift their conscious state. And when that happens, and to your point, when your client was so dismissed, why would you go back to PT? Why would you go back to something quote unquote established when a psychic took away your pain, when magnets took away your pain, when light therapy took away your pain? Because what happened? You found a community, you found someone that was worth listening to. And I think that's, you know, something I always try to keep in mind, right? Is that when people come in and see me and they're stuck in pain, and they're like, well, you know, I'm still going to see this person because that works. I'm like, that's great. Now what we want to try to do is, in that shifted state, come up with some active strategies to kind of keep you moving forward. And then that's where, like, I think I can kind of insert myself in many people's cases. But what are your thoughts on that? My definition, and then I can always like give you your thoughts on your definition. We could go back and forth there too. But, you know, do you think that sort of encompasses some of the stuff we were talking about, or maybe some of the things that we missed to your original question too?
Yeah, no, I like it. And I don't think, I mean, I would probably describe it all differently, but I think that there's, you know, there's a lot of overlap. So, I mean, I think I like always to try to like simplify how I think about things, right? And like the alarm system analogy is kind of like always one I've been kind of like driven to. And with anything, when we're making these analogies, I feel like they potentially miss the mark because it can't encompass everything. You're trying to like take a complex subject and then make it seem like it's like, oh, it's an alarm, right? But in essence, when I look at pain, it's your body's request for a change, right? Something's going on where it feels threatened. There's a protective mechanism underlying, right? And going back to being a personal experience, everyone's alarm system can be different, right? Someone can be more sensitive. Somebody can have one that's less sensitive, right? There can be potential genetic things that kind of underlie with this stuff, right? So there are a lot of reasons why someone could have pain, but at the end of the day, when you want to look at it, right, like your body is just not really happy with the stress levels your body is encompassing, and that can be physical, that can be emotional, can come from a lot of different places. And when your body has too much stress in whatever form or fashion, right, the response for your body is going to be painful in a sense. And then, you know, similar to you, I mean, like there's a huge, you know, I think, you know, we can look at it from like that psychological perspective. And this kind of like, how do we, you know, connect with someone and empower them? And I think where I look at why I'm successful with people who struggle is that you're a guide for them, right? Somebody needs, when they're in pain, not just to have someone they trust to handle the process, but they also need permission's the wrong word, but they need to have that permission to challenge their body and understand when they feel something, what does it mean? Is it, you know, because when you're in pain, and I've been there, right? Like, oh, my pain is back. Well, you can almost like freak out for a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh man, it's back. I'm, you know, like this is terrible. But sometimes that pain response isn't a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually a positive thing. And if we keep exploring this low level pain, well, your body's going to adapt and we can move you over that hurdle, right? So we're the guide that's going to help you understand your body a little bit better, understand pain a little bit better, create that trust, but then give you permission to challenge your body in a new way so you can get that progressive stimulus so that even if there is pain there, you're able to function and do things at a higher level with that same level of discomfort that you had in the past. That's also a sign of progress, and it's not just pain going away. And I think people need to realize that too. If you have pain for a long period of time, 10 years, I think I heard you say this once, and I use it all the time. Like, it's unfair for somebody to sit down in front of somebody who has pain for 10 years and tell them that I can get you pain free in 4 months. Like, it's probably not, I mean, maybe it could happen, but it's probably not a realistic thing for someone to, like, an expectation to set. But I think I can ultimately sit after I assess somebody and say, well, I can bring down your pain levels, or, we can bring down those pain levels and have you do X, Y, and Z more effectively, where you can do all this extra stuff that you couldn't do currently because you would feel like, quote unquote, like you're gonna feel it the next day, or you're gonna have repercussions because of it. That's a word I hear often, where we can kind of build more tolerance to the stress that can drive this pain response. Yeah, so I guess we can have our go back and forth there, but that's kind of what I would say there, and kind of how I look at things. We're that guide. There's a huge psychological component. There's still a physical component to things. We can't brush that aside. And then how do all these things kind of come together within that pain experience for this particular person, and what can we do to move the needle?
Yeah, the guide term is something, too, I've shifted a lot over the last
I remember when you
5
wanted to be
to
called the
10
movement
years.
Sherpa.
The Movement Sherpa. That's correct, Joe. Wow, I haven't thought about Movement Sherpa in a really long time. That was going to be my claim to fame. I was going to make T-shirts. There was going to be, an avatar of myself or something climbing up a painful mountain, holding your hand. I had a whole, theme for it. And if anyone listening wants to, claim Movement Sherpa, go for it. You have my blessing. But the thing there that I think a lot of clinicians struggle with is not being a fixer, right? But being, changing that role, like we were saying in the beginning of the episode, and transitioning to guide. That's really tough for a lot of clinicians to accept or even kind of think about, because people are coming to see us, right? But to your point, there is no fix for pain, right? There's no instant fix for tissue, for nerves, for bone, right? Everything goes through its healing process, right? And it starts from the minute you get injured. So whatever injury you have, your body starts repairing it right away. And then depending on the tissue, it'll take a few weeks to a few months. And if we're thinking about emotions mixed into this, like the original definition suggested, to change your mindset, to change your behaviors, you're talking years, and you're talking probably years of continued work. And I think this is where we could probably just, I'll draw analogies to, even things like AA, right? Like, it's not that you stop drinking or you stop abusing a substance for 30 days and you're cured, right? You keep showing up, you keep working on yourself. And this is a lifelong commitment. And I think we have to view sort of our exploration of our bodies the same way. Is that, look, just because you felt better after something doesn't mean you're fixed. This is an ongoing process. There will be flares along the way. And what I've found helpful for people to understand is that flares are, like you said, normal. They're just part of the process. I don't pull back anymore from them. I don't sort of reorganize my treatment strategies when I hear them. And now I'm actually even more upfront with people when they start to do well. I'm like, hey, look, I'm really proud of you. I think you've been doing awesome. But I just want to prepare us that it is very likely sometime in the near future, you'll probably have a flare, because 90% of people or so do, at least with back pain statistics. It seems that way anyway. So why wouldn't that be the same for feet? Why wouldn't that be the same for shoulders? Why wouldn't that be the same for elbows? And I want you to know that even when that flare happens, all the work you did to condition your mind, to condition your tissues, to condition your body is not suddenly lost. It doesn't just it's not like a cup that just gets poured out, right? It's still there. You just have to realize that this is part of the waves and ebbs and flows of pain. And that probably is another reason why people also feel better with a lot of different treatments, because when are you and I, or really anybody, going to get treatment, right? When things become intolerable or at the crest of a wave, right? But what happens after the crest of a wave? It just naturally comes back down. So I'm there with you at the worst part of your experience. I offer you a treatment, whatever that is, and then just natural history just kind of takes you back down. And we both think, oh, it was because of your alignment. Oh, it was because of the magic magnets. It was because of this. It was because of that. But meanwhile, it had nothing to do with any of that. I just was there, like you said, as a guide, navigating you through a really difficult time. And now let me prepare you for the next wave, right? Because if we've all been to beaches, there's another wave coming. And how are we going to handle that one, right?
So two things here before we kind of wrap this up, because this episode can become, I think, an hour and a half long if we continue down this route. Because I already have like a whole bunch of things I want to talk about that I think we're going to just turn into other episodes. But two things based on what you said. One, I mean, 100%, I think as a physical therapist, as trainers, as chiros, as people on our side of things, right? It's, yes, it's hard to grasp that fact that, especially with chronic pain, maybe with like a regular, like if you sprain your ankle, right? Like this is not going to be the same process. But it's hard for us to wrap our mind around like where they guide, right? And we can't just be like, it's not as easy like, oh, I can fix this one thing and your pain's going to go away. But it's also hard for the client too. I have some people who are like so fixated on, I need to be out of pain. Not that how can I even function with the 1 or 2 level pain, like any little thing that pops up is potentially a hurdle. And there are things that we have to really work through. And like, that's why I'm big on setting expectations. Like in the beginning, if we can exceed those expectations and you get pain free, great. But based on what I'm seeing and history of pain and things like that, if I feel like, there may be some struggle, and I mean, I've had pain for, I don't even know, I mean, like 15 years maybe, right? Like, why would it, so like I would put myself in the chronic pain bucket of things, right? So what is realistic for the person that you're going to be working with? How can you set realistic expectations with them? And then how can you guide them through that process? The other thing I wanted to mention that you brought up, luckily I wrote it down because I'm already starting to forget it. Give me one second here, Joe. My brain doesn't work. Short-term memory is a terrible thing.
That's fine, Joe. Take your time.
Man, I can't even remember. Even with me, I know I wrote it down, so I'm just going to leave it there. And it will come to me, and I'll bring it up later. But with that said, like I said, we can talk about this forever. So our next episode that we're going to be going through, we're going to talk specifically. Or was there anything else you want to add in there, Joe? I don't want to be making.
No, not today, man. No, not today. Like you said, I think that our sort of mission in this thing too is try to keep episodes manageable for the listener. So there's still tons more to talk about, but I'm good for today.
Okay, beautiful. So yeah, next episode, I think it'll be fun. I don't think it'll be fun. It will be fun. But we're going to shift going from pain to fitness. How we view fitness. What do we do from a fitness perspective? I want to talk a little bit about the difference between exercise and training, because I do definitely think there's a difference there. In those regards, right? Being very, very specific with how we're going about things and trying to make specific things better versus just exercising for general health with, some of these guidelines that are out here. Maybe we'll talk about those guidelines, like, ACSM and general fitness guidelines and how do we view them and do they make sense? Let me make that note of that now before I forget, because I am forgetful. And I'll be interested to hearing your thoughts on that and diving deeper into more of the fitness side of things. And then we'll start to put all these pieces together and talk and branch out from there. But I think that'll be a fun combo.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone listening, if you guys have questions or thoughts about any of the things that we shared, we can probably throw our emails or something in the show notes, and maybe we'll eventually, maybe we'll get a little Cups of Joe's email going to have everybody just be able to interact with us a little bit easier. But for now, I think we could probably just throw our emails in there, throw some of your thoughts. What is your definition of pain? Why don't we start with that? Anybody listening, why don't you drop a comment on what your definition
let us know what you
of pain
think of
is?
I like that.
All right, and then we'll go there. Maybe if we collect enough data points, we can bring this episode back and rehash it with everyone's thoughts there and kind of share them.
Beautiful.
With everyone.
Love you. And I love everyone listening.
Love you.
Made it to the end. Extra love for you. Very nice.